What if I told you that the version of you who keeps losing, keeps saying the wrong thing, keeps spiraling in your own head, keeps reacting before thinking, keeps watching your bank account empty out, isn't failing because of bad luck? What if the real reason is simpler, more uncomfortable, and completely within your power to fix? Here it is. You haven't learned to control four things: your mouth, your mind, your mood, and your money. Right now, as you're reading this, at least one of these four areas is quietly working against you. Maybe you said something last week that you still regret, something that slipped out in a moment of frustration and cost you a friendship, a deal, or someone's trust. Maybe your mind has been running a loop of worst-case scenarios so long that anxiety has started to feel like your default setting. Maybe your emotions have been making your decisions for you, and you've only been noticing the damage afterward. Or maybe you've been earning decent money for years and still can't figure out where it keeps disappearing. None of that makes you weak. None of it makes you broken. But here's the truth you need to hear. You are not a victim of your circumstances. You are simply out of alignment with yourself. And until you learn to master these four fundamental areas, you'll keep living a life that happens to you, instead of a life you consciously build. But here's what changes everything. These four areas are learnable. They are trainable. They respond to practice, intention, and the right understanding. Once you genuinely get how to operate your mouth, your mind, your mood, and your money, everything shifts. Your relationships deepen. Your confidence becomes something you carry with you instead of something you perform. Your emotional world stabilizes. Your financial reality transforms from a source of stress into a source of freedom. That's what this is about. Not theory, not inspiration that evaporates by tomorrow morning. Practical, actionable understanding that you can start applying today in real conversations, real moments of doubt, real emotional spirals, and real financial decisions. If you're ready to stop being controlled by these forces and start controlling them, let's go. Part 1. The engine underneath everything. The foundation of self-control. Let's start with something that most personal development content gets completely wrong. Self-control is not a personality trait. It is not something you either have or you don't. It is not reserved for people with iron willpower or exceptional discipline. Self-control is a skill. And like every skill that matters in life, from playing an instrument to building a business to maintaining a relationship, it can be developed, strengthened, and yes, mastered. The first thing you need to truly understand is this: self-control operates like an engine, not a switch. You don't just turn it on and off. It has fuel, it has capacity, it has conditions under which it runs well and conditions under which it breaks down. Every time you resist an impulse, every time you choose the harder path over the easier one, every time you delay what feels good now for something better later, you're adding performance to that engine. You're training it. You're expanding its capacity. But engines also run out of fuel, and when yours is depleted, things fall apart in ways you probably recognize. You eat clean all day and then find yourself raiding the kitchen at midnight. You work with sharp focus all morning and spend the afternoon getting nothing done. You handle stress gracefully for weeks and then completely lose it over something that, on any other day, wouldn't even register. That's not weakness. That's an engine running on empty. Here's what most people miss. You don't build self-control by fighting yourself harder. That's exhausting, unsustainable, and honestly, it doesn't work. True self-control isn't about brute forcing your impulses into submission. It's about building systems, habits, and environments that make the right choice feel natural, even automatic. It's about designing your life so that discipline becomes your default, not your daily battle. And here's the part that makes all of this even more powerful. Your mouth, your mind, your mood, and your money are not four separate problems. They are four interconnected systems. When you strengthen one, you get leverage in all the others. Think about it this way. When you learn to control what you say, you develop the mental discipline to control what you think. When you master your emotional world, you gain the clarity to make better financial choices. When you take ownership of your money, the confidence that comes from that stability reshapes your entire mindset. You're not fixing four separate issues. You're building one comprehensive system, a system of self-mastery that creates a ripple effect across every area of your life. There's another shift that has to happen before any of this works. You have to move from being reactive to being proactive. Most people live entirely in reactive mode. Something happens. Someone says something, a bill arrives, a plan falls apart, and they respond automatically. They speak without pausing. They let their thoughts spiral without redirecting. They let their emotions run the show. They spend money to manage how they feel in the moment. But when you develop real self-control, you become proactive. You choose your words deliberately. You direct your thoughts with intention. You manage your emotional state consciously. You allocate your money according to a plan that reflects your actual values. The foundation that makes all of this possible is self-awareness. You cannot control what you don't see. This means getting honest about your patterns, the triggers that set you off, the habits that run on autopilot, the automatic responses that keep showing up in your life even when you're trying to do better. It means noticing the moment before you say something you'll regret, catching your mind as it starts sliding toward negativity, feeling the emotional temperature rising before it boils over, recognizing the moment you're about to make a financial decision based on feeling rather than strategy. Awareness is the gap between stimulus and response. And in that gap, however small it is, lives your freedom. There's also a fundamental tension you need to understand. Instant gratification versus delayed gratification. The world you live in is engineered for instant. Food in 20 minutes, entertainment with one click, validation with a post. The infrastructure of modern life is designed to give you everything immediately, and that design is quietly eroding your capacity to wait, to plan, to persist. The people who master self-control understand something that most people resist. The best things require time. Controlling your mouth means staying quiet when you want to explode. Controlling your mind means focusing on what matters when distraction feels much better. Controlling your mood means staying composed when everything in you wants to react. Controlling your money means building future freedom instead of satisfying current impulse. This isn't about suffering. It's about trading small, immediate satisfaction for large, lasting fulfillment. And once you understand that trade, once you feel it, not just intellectually grasp it, everything becomes easier. Part 2. Your mouth is either your greatest tool or your biggest leak. Every word you speak is a decision with consequences. Some of those consequences are immediate. Some unfold over months or years. But nothing you do affects your relationships, your opportunities, your reputation, and your inner world quite like the words that come out of your mouth. And yet, most people treat their words like they're disposable, like they don't count until they cause obvious damage. They react before they think. They overshare before they've processed. They speak to fill silence rather than to add value. And then they wonder why certain relationships feel fragile, why certain opportunities keep slipping away, why trust is so hard to rebuild. Mastering your mouth begins with a counterintuitive truth. Silence is often more powerful than speech. We live in a world that rewards noise, the loudest voice, the fastest comeback, the person who always has something to say. But think about the people in your life who you genuinely respect, the ones whose words actually land, whose opinions actually matter to you. I'd bet they're not the ones who talk the most. They're the ones who speak deliberately, who pause, who choose, who seem to understand that every word carries weight. That's what mouth mastery looks like, not cleverness, not volume, intentionality. The first principle is the pause. And it sounds simple because it is, but don't underestimate it. Before you respond, especially when you're emotional, especially when you feel defensive or reactive, pause. Take a breath. Actually take it. And in that breath, ask yourself 3 questions. Is what I'm about to say actually true? Is it necessary? Will it help the situation or make it worse? That pause, applied consistently, will save more relationships, more deals, more friendships, more opportunities than almost any other single practice in this entire guide. Not because it makes you less honest, because it makes you more effective. Here's a distinction that will change how you communicate. The difference between reacting and responding. Reacting is immediate, emotional, and usually something you'll wish you could take back. Responding is thoughtful, measured, and strategic. When someone criticizes you, challenges you, or says something that genuinely stings, your nervous system wants to react. It wants to defend, to counterattack, to prove them wrong immediately. But the version of you with mouth mastery responds instead. They might say, "Let me think about that before I reply." Or simply, "That's an interesting perspective. I want to give it proper thought." This isn't passivity. This is power. Because you're choosing your next move instead of letting your nervous system choose it for you. Now, here's something most conversations about communication completely overlook. The most important words you ever speak are the ones you say to yourself. Your internal dialogue, the running commentary in your head, shapes your beliefs, your confidence, your interpretation of events, and ultimately, your behavior. If you're constantly telling yourself that you're not ready, not good enough, not capable, you're not just being self-critical. You're programming yourself. You're reinforcing neural pathways that will keep producing the same outputs. Start listening to that voice. Notice when it turns harsh and absolute. Notice when it catastrophizes. Notice when it speaks to you in ways you would never speak to someone you care about. Then, consciously, deliberately, change the channel. "I'm terrible at this becomes I'm still developing this." "I'll never get this right" becomes "I haven't cracked this yet, but I'm getting closer." The shift feels small. The effect, compounded over time, is enormous. Mouth mastery also means learning to ask better questions, both in conversation and internally. Most people make statements that close doors. Better questions open them. Instead of, "This won't work," what would need to change for this to work? Instead of, "That's impossible," what's the closest possible thing to that? Questions engage other minds. They create collaboration instead of resistance. They signal openness, curiosity, and intelligence, all qualities that make people want to stay in conversation with you. When it comes to difficult conversations, mouth mastery means choosing your battles with real clarity. Not every disagreement deserves to become a conflict. Not every mistake needs to be corrected out loud. Not every frustration needs to be voiced the moment it arises. Ask yourself, will addressing this actually change anything? Or am I just trying to discharge how I feel right now? Sometimes letting something go is the most powerful move available. Learn the craft of strategic communication, adjusting your language, your tone, your level of formality based on who you're talking to and what the situation requires. This isn't manipulation. This is emotional intelligence in action. The way you talk to a close friend should feel different from the way you present an idea to a room full of colleagues. The way you navigate a conflict with your partner requires different language than the way you give feedback to someone you're mentoring. One final piece that most people underestimate: your words have a half-life far longer than you think. The harsh thing you said in a moment of frustration might feel forgotten to you within a day. The person who received it might carry it for years. The encouragement you offered casually, the belief you expressed in someone when they were doubting themselves, that might be something they still think about decades from now. Your words matter. Speak accordingly. Part 3. Your mind is either your compass or your cage. Here's something that took a lot of people years of therapy, journaling, and hard experience to finally accept. And I want to give it to you right now, cleanly and directly. Your thoughts are not facts. Read that again. Because if you really absorb it, if it moves from something you've heard before into something you actually feel to be true, it will change the way you relate to your own mind forever. Your brain generates thousands of thoughts every single day. Many of them are negative. Many of them are distorted. Many of them are leftover programming from experiences that happened years ago in completely different circumstances, with completely different stakes. And yet, without training, without awareness, most people treat every thought that surfaces as if it's an accurate report on reality. I'm not good enough for this. Accepted as truth. This is never going to work out. Accepted as truth. Everyone probably thinks I'm struggling. Accepted as truth. None of these are facts. They're interpretations. They're patterns. They're your mind doing what untrained minds do, defaulting to protection mode, scanning for threat, amplifying uncertainty. The moment you understand that you are not your thoughts, that you are the one observing your thoughts, you gain something extraordinary: the ability to choose which thoughts to follow. The skill of watching your own mind. The first step in conquering your mind is developing what's called metacognition. Thinking about your thinking. This isn't as abstract as it sounds. It simply means starting to pay attention to your mental patterns with the same kind of curiosity you'd bring to anything else you're trying to understand. Notice when your mind starts pulling you toward worst-case scenarios. Notice when it loops back to a conversation that happened 3 days ago, replaying it, revising it, adding new layers of anxiety to it. Notice when it quietly tells you that you're behind, that others are doing better, that you're running out of time. That noticing, that moment of, oh, there it is again, is the beginning of freedom. Because you can't redirect something you haven't seen. Here's the practice. When a negative thought surfaces, don't fight it. Don't try to force it out. Just observe it. Name it even. There's that voice again telling me I'm not ready. My mind is doing the comparison spiral. This simple act of labeling, of stepping back from the thought rather than stepping into it, activates the part of your brain that can actually evaluate, reason, and choose. It creates space. And in that space, you can decide, is this thought worth following? Reframing, the most underused mental skill. One of the most powerful tools available to you, and one that most people never deliberately use, is cognitive reframing. This is the practice of consciously changing the lens through which you interpret what's happening. The same event can be viewed through a dozen different frames, each producing a completely different emotional and behavioral response. You apply for a role and don't get it. The automatic frame, I'm not good enough. I'll never break through. The reframe, this specific opportunity wasn't the right match, and now I have clearer information about what I need to develop. You make a significant financial mistake. The automatic frame, I'm irresponsible. I always do this. The reframe, this is expensive feedback. What does it tell me about a pattern I need to address? A relationship ends. The automatic frame, something is fundamentally wrong with me. The reframe, this didn't work, which means I now know something I didn't before about what I need and what I can offer. Notice what reframing is not. It's not toxic positivity. It's not pretending things are fine when they're hard. It's not dismissing pain or glossing over real difficulty. Reframing is choosing the most useful, most accurate, most empowering interpretation of what happened, one that keeps you in motion rather than collapsing you into paralysis. And with practice, it becomes faster. What used to take days of rumination starts taking hours, then minutes. Eventually, the reframe happens almost automatically, not because you're suppressing your response, but because your mind has been trained to look for the useful angle. Direction. Your mind needs a destination. Here's something about the human mind that's both fascinating and sobering. It will fill every available space. If you don't give it a direction, a clear focus, a meaningful goal, a problem worth solving, it will find its own material to work with, and the material it defaults to is rarely useful. It gravitates toward worry, comparison, regret, and hypothetical disasters. This is why clarity about your goals isn't just motivational, it's functional. Your mind operates better when it has a clear destination, when you set specific, meaningful goals and consistently remind yourself of them. You give your mind a filter. Suddenly, information that's relevant to your goals starts surfacing. Opportunities that align with where you're headed become visible. The mental noise doesn't disappear, but it becomes easier to distinguish from the signal. Try this. Instead of letting your mind wander in the morning, or worse, immediately filling it with notifications and other people's urgencies, give it a clear assignment. What am I working toward today? What matters most right now? What's the one thing I can do today that would make everything else easier? Your mind is genuinely creative when you give it clear, focused questions to work with. Use that. The practice of mental rehearsal athletes have used this technique for decades. Surgeons use it, musicians use it, and yet most people in everyday life never apply it. Even though it works just as powerfully for presentations, difficult conversations, job interviews, or any high-stakes situation you're preparing for. Mental rehearsal means running through an experience in your mind with full intention and detail before it actually happens. Not fantasizing, not wishful thinking, deliberate, specific visualization of yourself performing well, navigating the moment with the skill, composure, and clarity you want to bring. Before an important conversation, close your eyes and walk through it. See yourself staying grounded when the tension rises. Hear yourself choosing your words carefully. Feel the confidence you want to carry into the room. Your brain doesn't fully distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. The same neural pathways activate, which means mental rehearsal is literally practice. It prepares your brain for what's coming and makes composed, skillful performance more available when you need it. Information is your mental diet. You are, in significant part, what you consistently consume, the content you absorb, what you read, watch, listen to, the conversations you participate in, shapes your thinking patterns, your beliefs about what's possible, and your baseline emotional state. This isn't metaphorical. It's neurological. If you're constantly consuming content that amplifies outrage, comparison, anxiety, or inadequacy, your mind will reflect that. It will become a place that generates those states spontaneously, even when nothing in your immediate environment is causing them. Be intentional about your information diet the same way a serious athlete is intentional about their nutritional one. Not obsessively, not anxiously, but with genuine awareness. Ask yourself regularly, is what I'm consuming building my mind or draining it? Is it giving me useful perspectives and energy or leaving me feeling worse than before? Choose books, podcasts, conversations, and communities that challenge your thinking in productive ways, that expose you to people thinking bigger, solving harder problems, and living with more intention. That input compounds over time in exactly the same way small financial investments do. Conquering your mind is a daily practice, not a destination. One last thing before we move to mood, and this matters. You will never fully silence the negative voice. You will never reach a state where your mind never spirals, never doubts, never generates unhelpful thoughts. That is not the goal. The goal is to become faster at catching it and more skilled at redirecting it. Think of it less like winning a war and more like tending a garden. You don't eliminate weeds once and walk away. You tend consistently. You redirect regularly. And over time, what grows in your mental landscape changes, not because the weeds disappear, but because you've gotten so good at redirecting that the garden starts to look more like what you actually want it to be. Part 4. Your mood is not the weather. It's the thermostat. Most people treat their mood the way they treat the weather outside, as something that just arrives. They wake up, check their internal forecast, and let it determine the entire shape of their day. Good mood, productive, open, generous. Bad mood, guarded, reactive, stuck. Here's the reframe that changes everything. You are not at the mercy of your mood. You are the thermostat, not the thermometer. A thermometer reads the temperature. A thermostat sets it. And once you understand that your emotional state is something you can actively influence, not perfectly, not instantly, but genuinely and consistently, you stop being a passenger in your own emotional life. The three levers of mood. Your emotional state at any given moment is largely shaped by three things: your physiology, your focus, and your language. Shift any one of them, and your mood shifts. Shift all three simultaneously, and you can transform how you feel within minutes. Physiology is your body, your posture, your breathing, your facial expression, your movement. This runs deeper than most people realize. Your brain doesn't just send signals to your body. It receives signals from your body and uses them to determine what emotional state you should be in. When you're in a low mood, your body reflects it. Shoulders rounded, breathing shallow, gaze down, movement slow. But here's what's remarkable. You can work this in reverse. Change your body, and your brain gets new information. It starts producing different chemistry. Stand up straight. Take 5 slow, full breaths, all the way in, all the way out. Put a slight smile on your face, even if it feels forced. Move your body with some energy for 30 seconds. It sounds almost too simple. Try it seriously and notice what happens. The shift is real and it's fast. Focus is where your attention is pointed. Whatever you focus on expands in your awareness. It becomes your felt reality. Focus on what's missing, what's broken, what's unfair, and that's what your experience will consist of. Focus on what's working, what you're grateful for, what's possible. And your emotional world reorganizes around that. This isn't about denial or forced positivity. It's about consciously directing your attention rather than letting it default to wherever gravity pulls it. When you notice your mood dipping, pause and ask, what am I focused on right now? Is this focus serving me? Then deliberately redirect, not away from reality, but toward the aspects of reality that give you energy rather than drain it. Language, both internal and external, profoundly shapes how you experience your emotional life. The words you use to describe what you're feeling don't just describe the feeling, they amplify it or diminish it. This is a disaster, produces a very different emotional experience than this is a setback. I'm devastated hits differently than I'm disappointed. Everything's falling apart versus I'm navigating some difficulty right now. Same situation, same facts, different language, dramatically different emotional experience. Start paying attention to how you narrate your circumstances to yourself and to others, not to minimize what's genuinely hard, but to find language that describes reality accurately without unnecessarily inflating it into something more emotionally overwhelming than it needs to be. Know your triggers before they pull you. Every person has emotional triggers, specific situations, types of people, tones of voice, environments, or thoughts that reliably shift their mood in a negative direction. Most people discover these triggers after they've already been pulled. Mood mastery means learning your triggers before they fire and preparing for them. Think about the situations in your life that consistently destabilize your emotional state. Traffic delays, certain kinds of criticism, feeling ignored or dismissed, financial pressure, environments with a lot of noise and chaos. People who drain your energy. Once you've identified them honestly, you can build strategies in advance. If you know a particular kind of meeting reliably triggers anxiety, you can prepare a grounding practice to use beforehand. If you know a certain person consistently leaves you feeling depleted, you can set internal limits on how much of your emotional energy you invest in those interactions. Preparation is one of the most underrated mood management tools available. The best time to plan your response to a difficult situation is before you're in it. Separating events from interpretations. Here's a distinction that will fundamentally change your emotional life if you apply it consistently. The event and your interpretation of the event are two completely different things. Something happens. Then you interpret what it means. Then you feel something based on that interpretation, not based on the event itself. Two people receive the same critical feedback on a project they've worked hard on. One interprets it as evidence that they're not cut out for this. They feel discouraged, maybe ashamed. The other interprets it as useful data that will make the next version significantly better. They feel motivated, maybe grateful. Same event. Completely different emotional experience because of interpretation. This means you have more control over your emotional responses than you've probably been exercising, not by suppressing your feelings, but by examining and choosing the interpretation that produces the most useful emotional state. Ask yourself, is my interpretation of this situation the only possible one? Is it the most accurate one? What would a calm, wise version of me think about this? Building emotional regulation. Tools you can actually use. There are a number of practical techniques for shifting your emotional state. But the key is this. You need to practice them when you're calm, so they're available when you're not. Deep, controlled breathing activates your parasympathetic nervous system, the part of your nervous system responsible for calming you down. It literally overrides the stress response. 5 deliberate breaths, slow inhale, slower exhale, is not a wellness cliche. It's physiology. Physical movement, even brief, even mild, changes your neurochemistry. A 5-minute walk when you're overwhelmed isn't avoiding the problem. It's resetting your system so you can actually address the problem effectively. Gratitude isn't just a feel-good practice. Actively directing your attention to what you genuinely appreciate, specifically, not generically, shift your focus in a way that measurably changes your emotional state. Not because your problems disappear, because your perspective expands. Create what you might call mood anchors, specific, reliable things that consistently shift your emotional state in a positive direction. A particular song, a specific physical movement, a memory that brings genuine warmth, a short phrase or reminder that reorients you. These are not tricks, they are tools. Have them ready. The difference between feelings and identity. One of the most important things you can understand about emotional regulation is this. You are not your feelings. You have feelings. They pass through you. They provide information, but they are not you, and they are not permanent. You can feel frustrated without being a frustrated person. You can feel afraid without being a fearful person. You can feel sad without being broken. The goal of mood mastery is not to eliminate difficult emotions. That's not possible, and it's not desirable. Difficult emotions carry real information. Sadness tells you something mattered. Anger tells you a boundary was crossed. Fear tells you something feels threatening. These signals are useful. The goal is to experience your emotions without being controlled by them. To feel the feeling, extract the information, and then consciously choose your response rather than letting the emotion be the response. That's emotional maturity. And like every skill in this guide, it grows with practice. Not dramatically overnight, but consistently over time. in a way that eventually becomes one of the most significant changes you'll make in your quality of life. Part 5. Your money is either your servant or your master. Let's talk about money, not in the way that makes you feel judged or ashamed or like you're already behind, but honestly, directly, the way a good friend who happened to understand finance would talk to you. Because here's the thing about money that nobody tells you clearly enough. Your financial situation is not primarily a math problem. It's a psychology problem. You can know exactly what you should be doing with your money: saving, investing, avoiding impulse purchases, building an emergency fund, and still not do it. Most people who struggle financially don't lack information. They lack alignment between what they know and how they actually behave around money. And that gap is almost always emotional. Money represents something different to every person. For some, it's security. For others, it's freedom. For many, it's status or identity or proof of worth. And whatever money represents to you at a deep, often unexamined level is driving your financial behavior far more than any spreadsheet or budget app ever will. Until you understand your relationship with money, not just the mechanics of managing it, you'll keep running the same patterns regardless of how much you earn. Start with awareness, because you cannot manage what you don't see. The first step in taking control of your money is developing genuine financial awareness. And I mean real awareness, not a vague sense of roughly how much comes in and roughly how much goes out, but actual clarity. Most people have no precise idea where their money goes. They earn it, they spend it, they check their balance with a mix of hope and dread, and they wonder why the number is always lower than they expected. This isn't irresponsibility. It's the natural result of never having been taught to pay attention. Start tracking every single dollar, incoming and outgoing, for 1 month. Not to judge yourself, not to feel guilty, just to see. The awareness alone, without changing a single behavior, tends to produce changes. Because when you actually see where your money is going, patterns emerge that were invisible before. Subscriptions you forgot about. Daily spending that feels small but compounds into something significant. Categories where your actual spending is completely disconnected from your stated values. You can't steer toward what you want until you can see where you currently are. The budget that actually works. The word budget makes most people feel restricted before they've even started. So let's reframe it. A budget is not a cage. It's a plan. It's you telling your money where to go instead of wondering afterward where it went. The most common reason budgets fail is that they're built on aspiration rather than reality. People cut every enjoyable expense, set savings targets that require near-perfect discipline, and create a financial plan that works beautifully in theory and collapses within 2 weeks in real life. A budget that works has to be realistic. It has to account for who you actually are, not the idealized version of yourself you wish you were. A useful starting framework is the 50-30-20 approach. 50% of your after-tax income goes toward genuine needs: housing, food, transportation, essential bills. 30% goes toward the things you actually want: dining out, entertainment, travel, hobbies. 20% goes toward your future: savings, investments, paying down debt beyond minimum payments. This isn't a rigid law. It's a starting structure that you adjust based on your actual situation. Maybe your needs currently take up 60%. Maybe you're in a position to push savings higher than 20. Use the framework as a compass, not a prescription. The key question to ask about every line in your budget is this: does this reflect what I actually value, or does it reflect habit, impulse, and default spending? Most people discover that a significant portion of their spending falls into the second category, not because they're careless, but because they've never been intentional. Needs versus wants. The line that moves. Here's where the work gets genuinely challenging, because the line between need and want is not fixed. Consumer culture is extraordinarily skilled at convincing you that wants are needs, that certain clothing, certain cars, certain tech, certain experiences are not luxuries but necessities. You need clothing. You don't need this season's specific version of it. You need transportation. You don't need a vehicle that signals your status. You need food. You don't need to spend on restaurants at a frequency that doesn't match your income. None of this is about deprivation. It's about conscious choice. The goal is not to eliminate enjoyment from your financial life. The goal is to make sure your spending reflects deliberate decisions rather than automatic ones. Before any significant purchase, practice this three-question pause. Is this a genuine need or a want I've elevated to feel like a need? Will this purchase still feel worth it to me in 3 months? Does buying this move me closer to or further from the financial life I actually want? This isn't about always saying no. It's about making sure every yes is intentional. The emergency fund, your financial foundation. Before you invest, before you aggressively pay down debt, before almost anything else, build an emergency fund. This is money you do not touch except for genuine emergencies. Car repairs, medical costs, job loss, the unexpected, expensive realities of being alive. It lives in a savings account that's accessible, but not so immediately accessible that you'll rate it impulsively. And it should cover between 3 and 6 months of your basic living expenses. Here's why this matters beyond the obvious. Financial anxiety is one of the most powerful destroyers of good decision-making. When you're operating without a financial cushion, every unexpected expense becomes a crisis. Every setback triggers fear, and fear-driven financial decisions, reaching for credit cards, avoiding necessary investments, making impulsive choices to relieve anxiety, tend to make things worse. An emergency fund doesn't just protect you from unexpected expenses. It changes your entire psychological relationship with money. It replaces the constant low-grade dread of financial fragility with a foundation of genuine security. And from that foundation, every other financial decision you make gets clearer and calmer. Pay yourself first, without negotiating with yourself. Here's one of the most important financial habits you can build, and it's also one of the simplest. Pay yourself first. Before you pay any bill, before any discretionary spending, before you even think about what you might want this week, move money into savings or investments. Automate it, if at all possible, so that it happens without requiring any willpower or decision-making from you in the moment. Even if it's a small amount right now, the amount matters less than the habit. The habit of consistently directing money toward your future self before your present self has the chance to spend it is what builds wealth over time. This single practice, maintained consistently, does more for long-term financial health than almost any other strategy. The compound effect in real numbers Einstein is widely quoted as calling compound interest the most powerful force in the universe, Whether or not he actually said it, the math makes the point unmistakably. When you save and invest consistently, you earn returns not just on what you put in, but on everything that's accumulated before it. The growth feeds itself, slowly at first, then over time, in ways that become genuinely remarkable. Here's a concrete illustration. If you set aside a modest amount each month, starting in your mid-20s, and earn a reasonable average annual return, by your mid-60s, you'll have accumulated significantly more than the total amount you put in, often 3, 4, or 5 times more. If you wait 10 years to start, you might end up with roughly half of what you would have had. The same monthly amount. 10 years later, half the outcome. The lesson is not to create anxiety about time. The lesson is this: the best time to start is now. Not when circumstances are perfect, not when you feel ready. Now. Even small, consistent contributions, given enough time, become genuinely life-changing. Debt. The strategic view. Not all debt is equal. Debt used to acquire something that increases in value, real estate, education that genuinely expands your earning capacity, can be a legitimate tool. But consumer debt, especially high-interest credit card debt, is one of the most reliable mechanisms for keeping people financially stuck. If you're carrying a high-interest debt, here's the honest truth. You are not building wealth while that debt exists. The interest you're paying almost certainly exceeds any investment return you could realistically expect. Eliminating that debt is therefore one of the highest return financial moves available to you. There are different strategic approaches. Paying the highest interest rate first for maximum mathematical efficiency, or paying the smallest balance first for psychological momentum. Both work. The best strategy is the one you'll actually follow through on. What matters most is this: treat high-interest debt as the financial emergency it is, not something to manage indefinitely, something to eliminate. Part 6. The invisible force that keeps undoing your progress. You've learned the right things. You know what you should be doing. You've started well before, more than once, and somehow ended up back where you started. If that resonates, this section is for you. Self-sabotage is the most underestimated obstacle in personal development. Not because it's subtle. Once you know what to look for, it's actually quite recognizable. But because it operates in a way that feels completely rational from the inside. It disguises itself as realism, as caution, as practicality, as protecting yourself from disappointment. And it is doing more damage to your potential than any external obstacle ever has. Why you undermine yourself. Self-sabotage almost always traces back to one of two things: what you believe you deserve or what your current identity feels comfortable with. If somewhere beneath your conscious goals, you carry a belief that you're not the kind of person who succeeds, or that success will require you to become someone unfamiliar, someone exposed, someone who might fail publicly, your mind will find ways to prevent you from getting there. This isn't a character flaw, it's a protection mechanism. Your nervous system genuinely cannot distinguish between a threat to your physical safety and a threat to your identity. Both feel dangerous. Both trigger avoidance behavior. The problem is that this protection mechanism keeps you safe from growth as effectively as it keeps you safe from harm. The faces of self-sabotage. Self-sabotage rarely looks dramatic. It looks like procrastination, putting off the actions that would move you forward until the window closes. It looks like perfectionism, setting standards so impossibly high that starting feels pointless. It looks like the sudden appearance of urgent distractions every time you sit down to do meaningful work. It looks like imposter syndrome, the persistent, irrational conviction that you're not qualified for the success you're experiencing, that you're somehow fooling everyone, and that it's only a matter of time before you're exposed. Rather than celebrating progress, the imposter syndrome response is to minimize it, avoid opportunities to advance, and sometimes, unconsciously, create situations that confirm the belief that you don't really belong. It looks like the fear of success, which sounds counterintuitive until you examine what success actually brings. Change, new responsibility, visibility, the possibility of failing at a higher level. For many people, these prospects are genuinely threatening. The familiar discomfort of struggle feels safer than the unknown discomfort of achievement, and it intensifies. This is worth paying close attention to, precisely when you're closest to a breakthrough. The moment you're about to reach something significant, the resistance spikes. Motivation mysteriously evaporates. You create unnecessary conflict. You find reasons why this isn't the right time. Your sabotaging mind is working overtime because your current identity feels most threatened when the change is most real. Catching it and changing it. The first step is developing awareness of your specific self-sabotage patterns. Not generally, specifically. How do you typically get in your own way? What patterns show up repeatedly? What's the move you make every time you're close to something good? When you identify a sabotaging thought, I'm not ready, I don't deserve this, it's going to fall apart anyway. Don't fight it. Challenge it with evidence. What actually supports this belief? What contradicts it? Is this based on current reality or on something that happened years ago in completely different circumstances? Develop what you might think of as a success identity, a self-concept built around someone who grows, who handles difficulty, who deserves good outcomes and creates them. This isn't affirmation for its own sake. It's deliberately updating the operating system, because your behavior will consistently align with your identity. Change the identity, and behavior follows. Build systems that make self-sabotage harder. The genius of systems is that they don't rely on you feeling motivated, feeling worthy, or feeling ready. They just run. When progress is automated and built into your environment, when showing up is the path of least resistance rather than something that requires daily recommitment, your sabotaging mind has far less to work with. And finally, expect the resistance. Don't be surprised by it. Don't interpret it as a sign that something is wrong. Interpret it accurately as a sign that you're approaching something real. The presence of resistance is not evidence that you should stop. It's evidence that you're getting close to something that matters. Part 7. Discipline isn't what you think it is. Let's dismantle something right away. When most people think about discipline, they picture someone waking up at 5 in the morning with military precision, grinding through cold showers and brutal workouts, white-knuckling their way through every temptation with sheer force of will. They picture someone who never wavers, never struggles, never wants to quit. That image is not discipline. That's performance. And it's also, for most people, completely unsustainable. Real discipline is quieter than that. And it's built on something entirely different than willpower. True discipline is the natural outcome of clarity. Specifically, clarity about what you value, what you're building toward, and why it genuinely matters to you. When those things are real and vivid, the gap between knowing what to do and actually doing it narrows dramatically. Not because you've become superhuman, because you've become aligned. Start with your why and make it personal. Here's the question that makes discipline either easy or nearly impossible. Why does this actually matter to you? Not why it should matter, not why someone else thinks it should matter. Why does it matter to you, in your life, for your future, for the person you want to be, and the relationships you want to have? When your why is clear, specific, and emotionally real, discipline starts to feel less like forcing yourself and more like honoring yourself. Think about the 4 pillars we've been building throughout this guide. Why do you want to control your mouth? Maybe because you watched important relationships fracture over words said in the heat of the moment, and you don't want to keep paying that price. Maybe because you want to be someone that people genuinely trust, come to, rely on. Why do you want to control your mind? Perhaps because you've spent too many years being held hostage by self-doubt, and you're finally tired of it. Because, there's a version of you that operates from clarity and confidence, and you want to live from that place. Why do you want to control your mood? Maybe because the people you love most deserve a version of you that isn't at the mercy of every bad moment. Because you want your emotional state to be something you build intentionally, not something that just happens to you and everyone around you. Why do you want to control your money? Perhaps because financial stress has shaped too many of your decisions, kept you in situations you should have left, prevented you from pursuing what actually matters to you. Because real freedom requires a financial foundation, and you're ready to build one. The stronger and more personal your answers to these questions, the less discipline feels like a sacrifice. It starts feeling like an expression of who you're choosing to be. Small starts, real momentum. Here's where most ambitious people fail at building discipline. They try to change everything at once, inspired by a podcast, a conversation, or a moment of genuine clarity. They decide to overhaul their entire life simultaneously, wake up earlier, exercise daily, meditate, journal, track every expense, eat differently, read more, spend less time on their phone. By the end of the first week, the whole structure has collapsed, and instead of recognizing this as a design problem, they interpret it as a personal failure. It is not a personal failure. It is a predictable outcome of a flawed approach. Your brain resists large, sudden changes. It's not weakness. It's neuroscience. Your nervous system is wired to maintain familiar patterns. The more dramatic the proposed change, the stronger the resistance. The solution is to start with changes so small they feel almost embarrassingly easy. Not wake up 2 hours earlier, wake up 10 minutes earlier. Not a full workout, 10 minutes of movement. Not an hour of reading, 1 page before bed. Not a complete financial overhaul. Track 1 category of spending for 1 week. These feel insignificant. That's exactly why they work. Your brain doesn't resist them. You do them. You do them again. You experience the small satisfaction of following through on a commitment to yourself. That satisfaction, that sense of, I said I'd do this and I did, builds something real. It builds a track record, and that track record becomes the foundation of a disciplined identity. Small disciplines, consistently honored, compound into major life change. Not in a week, but absolutely, unmistakably, over months and years. Design your environment for discipline. One of the most powerful and most underused strategies for building discipline is environmental design, deliberately arranging your surroundings so that good choices are easier and poor choices require more effort. Think of it this way. Discipline that depends entirely on daily willpower is fragile. Discipline that's supported by your environment is robust because your environment is always working, even when your motivation isn't. Want to move your body more consistently? Put your workout gear somewhere you have to see it every morning. Want to eat better? Reorganize your kitchen so that nutritious food is at eye level and easy to reach. Want to read instead of scroll? Charge your phone in another room and put a book on your nightstand. Want to practice better mouth control? Write a single word, pause, on a sticky note somewhere. You'll see it regularly. Want to improve your financial discipline? Automate your savings transfer so it happens before you ever see the money. These seem like small environmental tweaks. They are, and they work at a level that willpower alone never consistently does, because they change what the path of least resistance looks like. Motivation versus discipline, understanding the difference. This distinction matters enormously, so let's make it explicit. Motivation is a feeling. Discipline is a practice. Motivation is wonderful when it's present. It makes action feel natural and even energizing. But motivation is inherently unreliable. It rises and falls based on your mood, your energy levels, how things have been going lately, what you've been consuming, dozens of variables outside your control. Disciplined people don't wait for motivation. They act regardless of whether it's present. They understand something counterintuitive but deeply true. Action creates motivation far more reliably than motivation creates action. When you don't feel like doing something you've committed to, the strategy is simple and effective. Tell yourself you only have to do it for 5 minutes. Just start. Just the first 5 minutes. What you'll find almost universally is that starting is the hardest part. Once you're in motion, continuing is far easier. Sometimes you'll do the full thing. Sometimes you'll genuinely stop at 5 minutes. Either way, you've done the most important thing. You've maintained your practice and honored your commitment to yourself. And that matters more than any single session ever will. Because you're not just building a skill, you're building an identity. Every time you follow through, you add evidence to the story you tell yourself about who you are. Do that enough times, and discipline stops being something you do. It becomes something you are. Part 8. The quiet power most people never develop. There's a kind of power that almost nobody talks about in personal development conversations. It doesn't look impressive. It doesn't generate content. It doesn't announce itself. It's silence. And the people who have genuinely mastered it, who know not just how to speak, but when not to, carry a kind of influence that volume simply cannot produce. Why silence is strategic, not passive. We live in a world that rewards noise. The most visible people, the loudest voices, the constant presence. And so most people have developed a reflex. Fill every quiet moment with words. Share every thought. Respond to every comment. Explain every decision. But think about the people in your life whose words genuinely carry weight. The ones you actually lean in to hear. I'd bet they're not the people who say the most. They're the people who speak with obvious intention, who have clearly thought before opening their mouth, who don't need to fill every moment, who seem comfortable in their own presence. Silence. used strategically, creates impact that constant speech never can. Because when you speak less, what you do say registers more. Strategic silence in conversation. When someone asks you a question, especially in a high-stakes conversation, resist the reflex to answer immediately. Pause. Think. Let them see you thinking. This communicates that you take the question seriously, and that your answer, when it comes, reflects genuine consideration rather than reflex. When someone says something challenging, aggressive, or emotionally charged, your instinct will be to respond immediately. Strategic silence gives you something far more useful: time. Time for the other person's emotional intensity to settle. Time for you to formulate a response rather than a reaction. And often, this is worth noticing, time for the other person to walk back, soften, or clarify what they said, because the silence creates space for them to hear themselves. In negotiations and high-stakes conversations, silence is one of the most powerful tools available. When an offer is made, whether it's a salary, a price, a proposal, resist the urge to fill the silence with an immediate response. Let it sit. The discomfort of that silence is felt by both parties, but the person who speaks first to relieve it is usually the one in the weaker position. Work in silence. Let results speak. Here's a piece of strategic silence that has nothing to do with conversation and everything to do with how you operate in the world. Keep your goals, plans, and ambitions quieter than your culture probably encourages. There's genuine psychological research behind this. When you announce your intentions, when you tell people about the business you're starting, the body you're building, the skill you're developing, your brain receives a portion of the satisfaction it would get from actually achieving those things. The announcement feels like progress. It isn't. And that premature sense of accomplishment quietly reduces your drive to do the actual work. The people who tend to achieve the most talk about what they're building the least while they're building it. They work, they develop, they create, and then the results speak in a way that no announcement ever could. While others are broadcasting their intentions, your job is to execute yours. Let the outcome be the statement. Silence as protection. Strategic silence also means choosing deliberately not to engage with everything that invites your engagement. Not every provocation requires a response. Not every criticism needs to be defended against. Not every argument needs your participation. Not every piece of gossip needs your contribution. The person who responds to everything, who can't let a slight pass unremarked, who always needs to have the last word, who participates in every drama that crosses their path, is giving enormous amounts of energy away. Energy that could be going somewhere meaningful. Choosing silence in these moments is not weakness. It is the recognition that your energy is finite and valuable, and that not every situation deserves a portion of it. Part 9. Emotional intelligence, reading the room inside yourself. If self-control is the foundation of everything we've covered, then emotional intelligence is the architecture built on top of it. It's the difference between someone who manages their behavior and someone who genuinely understands themselves, and through that understanding becomes far more effective in every relationship and situation they navigate. Emotional intelligence begins with self-awareness, the ability to recognize your own emotional states accurately in real time before they've already determined your behavior. Building your emotional vocabulary. Most people operate with an extremely limited emotional vocabulary: happy, sad, angry, fine, stressed. And because the vocabulary is limited, the awareness is limited. You can't precisely identify what you can't precisely name. Start expanding this. Instead of just angry, are you frustrated, resentful, irritated, indignant, feeling dismissed? Each of these has a different source, a different implication, and likely a different appropriate response. The more precisely you can identify what you're actually feeling, the better equipped you are to address it effectively. Notice the physical sensations that accompany your emotions. Anxiety often shows up as tightness in the chest or throat. Anger frequently manifests as heat, jaw tension, or a pressure behind the eyes. Fear can feel like a hollow sensation or a racing heart. When you learn to recognize these physical signals early, you can catch emotional states before they've built to the point where they're running your behavior. The pause between stimulus and response. Everything in emotional intelligence comes back to this: the space between what happens and how you respond. In that space, however small it feels, you have choice. The entire practice of emotional intelligence is about expanding that space and learning to use it. When something triggers an emotional reaction, the simplest and most effective intervention is a physical one. Breathe. 3 deliberate breaths. The physiological effect is real and immediate. It activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the biological off switch for the stress response. It gives your prefrontal cortex, the decision-making, reasoning part of your brain, a chance to come back online before you act. 3 breaths won't solve every emotional challenge, but they'll prevent a significant percentage of the damage that reactive behavior creates. Empathy as a skill. Emotional intelligence isn't just about managing your own emotional world. It's equally about understanding others. Empathy. Genuine empathy, not just performing understanding, is the ability to step into another person's perspective with real curiosity. Not to agree with them necessarily, not to excuse behavior that shouldn't be excused, but to genuinely ask, what might this situation look and feel like from where they're standing? This skill transforms conflict. When you can accurately understand what someone else is experiencing, what they need, what they fear, what's actually driving their behavior, you stop reacting to the surface presentation and start engaging with what's actually happening. Conversations that would otherwise escalate start finding resolution instead. Practice this deliberately. In your next difficult interaction, before you respond, take a moment to genuinely ask, what might this person be experiencing right now that I'm not seeing? You don't have to agree with their perspective to understand it, and understanding it almost always improves the outcome. Using emotions as information, not instructions. Here's the frame that brings emotional intelligence together. Your emotions are data. They are not directives. Anger tells you that something feels like a violation, a boundary crossed, a value threatened, a fairness issue unaddressed. That's useful information, but anger is not an instruction to attack. Fear tells you that something feels risky or threatening. That's worth examining. But fear is not an instruction to retreat from every challenge. Sadness tells you that something mattered, that a loss is real and significant. That deserves acknowledgement. But sadness is not an instruction to stop moving. The emotionally intelligent person hears the signal, extracts the information, and then chooses the response. The emotion informs the decision. It doesn't make it. This is emotional maturity, and it is one of the most genuinely transformative capacities you can develop, not just for your own well-being, but for the quality of every relationship and interaction in your life. Part 10. Your environment is always working, with you or against you. Here's something that most self-improvement conversations underemphasize to the point of negligence. You're not just a product of your choices, you're a product of your environment. The spaces you inhabit, the people you spend time with, the content you consume, the systems you've built around yourself, all of it is constantly shaping your thoughts, your emotions, your behavior, and your results. Not occasionally, continuously, whether you're aware of it or not. This means that trying to build self-mastery while living in an environment that actively works against it is like trying to swim upstream in a fast current. Possible, technically, but exhausting and unnecessary. The smarter approach is to design your environment so the current flows with you, so that good choices are easy, automatic, even inevitable, and poor choices require friction. Your physical space reflects and reinforces your mental state. Look around the space where you spend most of your time. What does it communicate? What behaviors does it encourage? What does it make easy, and what does it make harder? A cluttered, disorganized environment creates mental noise. It's not a dramatic effect. It's subtle, constant, and cumulative. The visual chaos of an unorganized space competes for your attention, increases low-grade cognitive load, and makes sustained focus harder than it needs to be. A clean, organized, intentionally arranged space does the opposite. It reduces friction for focused work. It communicates to your own nervous system that this is a place where clarity and productivity happen. It sounds almost too simple, but the research on this is consistent and clear. Design your physical environment to support the behaviors you want. If exercise matters to you, make exercise equipment visible and accessible, not buried in a closet where you have to make an effort to retrieve it. If reading matters, put books where your phone currently lives. If better eating matters, make nutritious food the first thing you see when you open the refrigerator. These arrangements don't require discipline in the moment. They make the right choice the default choice, and default choices made repeatedly over time become your life. Your social environment is your most powerful influence. Of all the elements of your environment, the people you spend the most time with are the most powerful force shaping who you become. This is not an exaggeration, and it's not a judgment of anyone in your life. It's simply the reality of how human beings work. We are deeply social creatures. We unconsciously adopt the habits, attitudes, language, standards, and expectations of the people we're around consistently. We rise or fall to the level of our closest relationships. Take an honest look at your inner circle. Are the people you spend the most time with moving toward something, or have they settled into complaint and stagnation? Are they honest with you, or do they tell you what's comfortable? Do they challenge you in ways that make you better, or do they enable patterns that keep you stuck? Do they celebrate your growth, or does your progress create tension? This audit isn't about finding perfect people or cutting off everyone who isn't at their best. It's about being honest with yourself about the influence your environment is having on you, and making intentional choices about who you prioritize, who you limit, and who you actively seek out. Seek relationships with people who are where you want to be, not to use them instrumentally, but to genuinely learn from them, be influenced by them, and have your sense of what's normal and possible expanded by regular proximity to them. And protect your emotional energy as carefully as you protect your physical health. Boundaries with people who consistently drain you, enable your worst patterns, or keep you small are not cruelty. They are self-respect. Your information environment shapes your reality. What you read, watch, listen to, and discuss doesn't just pass through you neutrally. It shapes your beliefs about what's possible, your baseline emotional state, your standards for your own life, and the quality of your thinking. Be as intentional about your information diet as you are, or aspire to be, about your physical one, not anxiously, not obsessively, but with genuine awareness. Start your day with content that expands your thinking rather than content that activates your anxiety or your comparison reflex. Use your commute, your exercise time, your routine tasks as opportunities to feed your mind with ideas and perspectives that move you forward. Be selective about the conversations you engage in, choosing ones that build rather than drain. Your environment is a system. Design it on purpose. Part 11. Small changes, compounded over time, become unrecognizable results. There's a mathematical reality underneath all personal development that most people either don't know or don't truly believe. A 1% improvement made consistently every day produces a result that is 37 times better after 1 year. 37 times better. From 1% daily improvement. The math is real. The inverse is equally true. A 1% daily decline produces a result that's nearly zero after the same year. This is the compound effect, and it operates in every area of life, including your mouth, your mind, your mood, and your money, with the same mathematical inevitability as it operates in finance. Why small changes work when big changes fail. Your brain is genuinely resistant to large sudden change. It interprets dramatic behavioral shifts as threats to the stability it's been maintaining. The bigger the proposed change, the stronger the resistance. But small changes, genuinely small ones, almost embarrassingly small, fly under that radar. Your brain doesn't resist reading one page. It doesn't resist 10 minutes of movement. It doesn't resist pausing for 3 seconds before responding. These feel too small to matter. That's exactly why they matter enormously. Because small changes, done consistently, do two things that dramatic changes cannot. First, they actually happen. They're within reach. On your worst day, your most exhausted day, your most distracted day. They require no special motivation, no ideal circumstances, no perfect version of yourself. Second, they build momentum. The person who commits to 1 page of reading per day almost always ends up reading for 30 minutes. The person who commits to a 5-minute walk almost always finishes a full session. Not always, but usually, because starting is the hardest part, and a small commitment makes starting accessible. Tracking makes the invisible visible. One of the reasons the compound effect is so difficult to trust and maintain is that early progress is genuinely invisible. You can practice better communication for 2 weeks and see no obvious change in your relationships. You can redirect negative thoughts consistently for a month and still have hard days. You can save a small amount every week for 6 months and look at the number and feel underwhelmed. But beneath what's visible, something real is accumulating. Neural pathways are strengthening. Habits are forming. Trust in yourself is building. Momentum is developing. The compound effect is working quietly below the surface. Track your small actions to make that invisible progress visible. Not to judge yourself, to see yourself. A simple daily record of whether you practiced your key habits in each of the 4 areas gives you a concrete picture of your consistency. And consistency, made visible, is motivating in a way that results alone, which come later, cannot be during the building phase. The compound effect works in both directions. Pay attention. This is worth being direct about. The compound effect is not only available for your positive habits, it's also working on your negative ones. Every time you speak without thinking, the habit of reactive communication gets slightly stronger. Every time you let a negative thought spiral unchallenged, catastrophic thinking becomes slightly more automatic. Every time you make a financial decision based on how you feel rather than on your actual values and plan, impulsive spending gets slightly more entrenched. Small negative patterns, compounded over time, create significant problems. This is not meant to create anxiety. It's meant to raise your awareness of the cumulative weight of small choices, because when you genuinely understand that weight, in both directions, every small decision starts to feel like what it actually is: an investment in, or a withdrawal from, who you're becoming. Part 12. The conversation that determines everything. You have thousands of conversations every year with colleagues, friends, family, strangers. Some go well, some don't. Most are forgettable. But there is one conversation that shapes all the others, one conversation that influences every decision you make, every emotion you feel, every action you take or avoid. One conversation that is running right now, even as you read this, in the background of your conscious experience. The conversation you're having with yourself. Your internal dialogue is the operating system underneath everything, and most people have never examined it carefully, let alone deliberately upgraded it. What is your internal voice actually saying? Start paying attention, not just occasionally, consistently. Throughout your day, notice the voice. What does it say when you make a mistake? When you receive criticism? When you look in the mirror? When you compare yourself to someone who seems further along? When you're about to do something that matters? Most people discover, when they actually listen, that their internal voice is considerably harsher than they would ever allow anyone else to be with them. They speak to themselves with a contempt and a certainty of inadequacy that they would immediately push back against if it came from an external source. This voice was largely programmed before you were old enough to evaluate it, by early experiences, by the words of people who had influence over you, by cultural messages absorbed before you had the critical faculties to filter them. You inherited much of this dialogue. You did not choose it, but you can choose to change it. Upgrading your internal operating system. Changing your internal dialogue is not about forcing relentless positivity. It's not about pretending difficulties don't exist or failures don't happen. It's about replacing inaccurate, unhelpful, damaging self-talk with honest, useful, constructive self-talk. When you catch yourself thinking, "I always mess this up," challenge it. Always? Is that actually true? What evidence contradicts it? A more accurate and useful thought might be, "I struggled with this before, and I'm working on doing it differently." When the voice says, "I'm not ready," ask, ready by whose standard? what would actually make me more ready than taking the next step? When it says, nobody thinks I'm capable, ask, is this a fact or a fear? What do I actually know versus what am I assuming? This questioning process doesn't silence the voice overnight, but it begins to erode the automatic authority that the negative voice has claimed, and gradually, with consistent practice, the internal dialogue starts to shift, not to something unrealistically positive, to something genuinely more accurate, more balanced, and more useful. Part 13. The psychology underneath your financial life. We covered the mechanics of money earlier, but there's a deeper layer that determines whether the mechanics ever get applied. And that's the psychology of your relationship with money. Your financial behaviors are not primarily rational. They are emotional. They reflect beliefs you formed early, patterns absorbed from your family, and deep associations between money and identity, safety, worth, and freedom. Until those are examined and addressed, the most sophisticated financial strategy in the world will be sabotaged by the psychological patterns running underneath it. Ask yourself honestly, what did money mean in your household growing up? Was it a source of stress, conflict, scarcity? Was it something people had complicated feelings about? Resentment toward those who had more? Anxiety about never having enough? Or was it something handled with openness, intention, and a sense of possibility? Whatever the answer, those early associations are currently shaping your financial behavior, not as an excuse, as an explanation. And explanations are useful because they point toward what needs to change. Examine whether you operate from a scarcity mindset or an abundance mindset. Scarcity thinking is the belief, often unconscious, that there isn't enough, that money is fundamentally limited, that you have to protect what you have, that other people's financial success somehow reduces your own opportunities. This mindset creates anxiety, hoarding behavior, and paradoxically tends to repel the opportunities and relationships that create real financial growth. Abundance thinking is not naivety. It's the recognition that financial circumstances are changeable, that opportunities can be created and expanded, that other people's success is information and inspiration rather than a threat. This mindset attracts opportunity because it produces confidence, generosity, and resourcefulness, qualities that people and situations respond to. Address the emotional spending patterns that most people carry, but few examine directly. Food, clothing, entertainment, experiences. Many purchases are not really about the item or the experience. They're about managing a feeling, boredom, loneliness, anxiety, the desire for a moment of control or comfort, life that feels uncertain. Retail therapy is real, and it creates real financial damage over time. When you notice the impulse to spend appearing in moments of emotional discomfort, pause long enough to ask, what am I actually feeling right now? Is buying something the most useful response to that feeling? Often, it isn't. And having a better alternative available, a walk, a conversation, a short practice of any kind, makes the pause productive rather than just frustrating. Your goal with money is not just to manage it better, it's to build a genuinely healthy relationship with it, one characterized by clarity, intention, confidence, and freedom, rather than anxiety, avoidance, and impulsivity. Part 14. When the four pillars work together, everything we've covered, your mouth, your mind, your mood, your money, has been presented as distinct areas. But here's the truth that ties this entire guide together. They are not four separate problems. They are four expressions of one underlying capacity: your ability to observe your impulses and choose your responses deliberately. Every time you pause before speaking, you're exercising the same fundamental skill as when you redirect a negative thought, regulate an emotional reaction, or resist an impulsive purchase. It's the same engine. Strengthening it in one area strengthens it in all areas. This means every small improvement creates leverage across the entire system. Better mouth control develops the mental discipline that supports mind control. Stronger mind control naturally elevates your mood by reducing the mental static that feeds emotional volatility. Better mood regulation produces the calm clarity that makes sound financial decisions possible. Financial confidence reduces the stress that was sabotaging your communication and flooding your mind with anxiety. The four pillars reinforce each other. Progress compounds not just within each area, but across all four simultaneously. Part 15, Your 90-Day Plan, where knowledge becomes life. Everything you've read until this point is only as valuable as what you do with it. Knowledge without consistent action is just interesting. It doesn't change your life. Action does. Here is a specific, realistic, week-by-week framework for your first 90 days. Weeks 1 and 2, awareness only. Before you try to change anything, simply observe. Carry a small notebook or use your phone to note moments in each of the four areas where your automatic response wasn't serving you. Don't judge. Don't intervene yet. Just see clearly. Awareness is the foundation without which every other strategy is guesswork. Weeks 3 and 4. Introduce the pause. In every conversation, especially charged ones, practice the 3-second pause before responding. That's the only new practice for these 2 weeks. Just the pause. Applied consistently, this single habit will produce noticeable changes in how interactions unfold and how you feel about them afterward. Weeks 5 and 6. Morning mental intention. Each morning, before anything else, spend 5 minutes writing 3 things you intend to focus on today, and 3 things you're genuinely grateful for. This simple practice redirects your mind before the day's noise fills it. Consistency here, even imperfect consistency, begins reshaping your mental default. Weeks 7 and 8. Emotional labeling. When you notice a strong emotional state arising, simply name it accurately. I'm feeling frustrated. I notice anxiety coming up. I'm experiencing disappointment. This labeling practice activates your rational mind, creates space, and interrupts the automatic emotional to behavioral pipeline. Practice it throughout each day. Weeks 9 and 10. Financial tracking and one small saving habit. Track every expense for 2 full weeks. Not to judge, to see. Simultaneously, establish one automatic saving action, however small. Set it up so it requires no ongoing decision. This is the beginning of your financial foundation. Weeks 11 and 12. Environmental optimization. Make one deliberate change to your physical environment that supports each pillar. Rearrange something, remove something, add something. Design one aspect of your surroundings so that it actively supports the version of yourself you're building. The final month, integration. Create a simple daily practice, 5 to 10 minutes, that touches all 4 areas. A brief morning check-in. How will I practice mouth control today? What will I direct my mind toward? How will I manage my emotional state if challenges arise? What financial choice will I make that aligns with my future? Short, simple, consistent. Track your progress weekly in all 4 areas. Rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, not to judge, to see trajectory. And when you slip, when you have a week that goes sideways, when old patterns resurface, when you fail to follow through, do not use that as evidence that you're not capable of change. Use it as information. What happened? What do you need to adjust? Then get back to it. Setbacks are not failures. They are part of the process. The only actual failure is using a setback as a reason to stop. What 90 days will actually build. By the end of this first 90 days, you won't be perfect. You won't have eliminated every old pattern or mastered every area completely, but you will have done something genuinely significant. You will have proven to yourself, through evidence, through your own track record, that you can change, that the gap between who you've been and who you want to be is crossable. That discipline is available to you, that your mouth, your mind, your mood, and your money are not fixed features of your personality. They are skills, and you have already begun developing them. The person you become through this process, through 90 days of consistent small choices, growing self-awareness, and deliberate practice, will be genuinely different from who you were when you started. Not because of a dramatic transformation, because of 100 small ones, compounding quietly, reshaping your defaults, rebuilding your self-concept. You are not at the mercy of your impulses. You are not a victim of your circumstances. You are not defined by your past patterns. You are someone who is learning to control your mouth, to direct your mind, to manage your mood, to master your money, and that changes everything.